So that's the first thing about God, His perfection in every possible way, and how we're not supposed to be doing shit. But that still doesn't answer a very important question. What do Muslims think God wants from them? What do they think God wants? What's their purpose in life? Why do you put them here on the earth? What are they doing here? So a few things that I want to highlight that, again, I think are unique perspectives. Some of these things you might already know, some you may not. So I'm going to just kind of bullet list them, and so you have kind of a concise view of how we see things in our faith tradition as far as our relationship with God is concerned. The first of them is our purpose in life. Our purpose in life is to find God in ourselves and to engage in a continuous struggle to submit to His will, to accept the fact that we were brought on this earth, and the greatest joy we will ever find is to actually be in servitude to Him. If we can find that willingly ourselves, then we have found our purpose in life. Willing, consensual servitude to God in any respect He wants. Now, when we say someone completely submits to someone else, or someone's completely under somebody else's will, then in the social sense, we actually consider that a form of slavery. In any other context, to take God out of the picture, when someone is in complete submission to somebody else's will, they do what somebody else says regardless of what area of life. In our jobs, there's at least a job description, right? So if you're an accountant, sorry to pick on accountants, then you're only working a certain number of hours, and you're not going to be asked to mop the floor unless the economy is really bad. You're going to be, there's a particular set of things you're supposed to do. Beyond that, if you're told to do them, you say, that's not my job. I'm just an accountant, right? But when you're in absolute submission to another entity's will, in other words, you're in slavery, well, a slave owner can turn to the slave and say what? Mop the floor, do the accounting, wash the windows while you're at it, do my laundry, whatever. He cannot be told, well, that's beyond my job description, right? And obviously, I'm using the term slavery, and it has negative connotations. But I want you to understand something. That in one sense, we do actually proudly accept willing slavery to God as Muslims. We actually call ourselves abd in Arabic, literally meaning slave. I can't give you a politically correct translation. That's what it is. Abd literally means in Arabic, slave. And that is actually the call of God to us, accept yourselves as slaves of mine. Now the difference though is slavery, let's just compare slavery in every other context and slavery in the Muslim context to God. Slavery is willing or unwilling. Does someone enter into slavery willingly or unwillingly? Unwillingly. It's never like, hey, I've exhausted all other career paths, so might as well. No, it doesn't work that way. Never has, never will. Islam, our slavery to God is already unique because He's saying, فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. By the way, whenever I quote something in Arabic, I'll translate immediately. Whoever wants, they can come and believe. Whoever wants, they can walk away. It's your choice. So it's already different because it's willing. Second, a slave would have to be a slave in every matter of life, right? Everything he does is up to the master's whim. God basically says, it's very beautiful in Islamic literature, the Quran says, وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, which actually says they do the few good things expected of them. In other words, God didn't make a long, endless list of stuff you got to do. There's a very short list of do's and don'ts. Take care of this and you live your life. Take care of this and everything else, you do however you do it. And even those few things, they're actually very, very few. There are very, very few restrictions, and there are very, very few obligations. You meet those, and you're in the clear. Other than that, enjoy life. Do whatever else you want. And even in those few restrictions, what God continuously explains is He only put them there because not putting them there will put you in harm's way. Our scholars traditionally explain God's restrictions like medication for a sick child. Which child? I have 6 kids myself. Yeah, seriously, 6. What child ever likes to take medication? I mean, honestly. But is it necessary? Yeah, and it's painful sometimes too. And the mother is forcing cough medicine down her son's throat, and he's yelling and screaming, and he's saying, I hate you, Mom, I can't believe you're doing this to me, why would you do this to me, etc. But at the end of all of it, that is an act of love from a mother. It's a painful act of love, but it's still an act of love, because she knows something the child doesn't. She understands something the child doesn't. And in some sense, some of the restrictions of Islam are explained in that way. In other words, عَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ وَعَسَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌ لَكُمْ. God says, maybe you hate something, but it's good for you. Maybe you really like something, but it's no good for you. وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Allah knows and you don't. Just trust me. So it's not a long list of prohibitions, it's a short list, and outside of that, you're free to live your life. Now, so that's the first thing. The second thing about us and God is that He created two lives for us. There are two lives. There's a life of this world, and there's a life in the afterlife. We believe in an afterlife, heaven and hell, day of judgment. All of our deeds will be presented before God, and people are going to be begging for God's forgiveness. And nobody's actually making it to heaven in Muslim creed unless through God's love and forgiveness. Our deeds alone aren't enough. That's unanimous Muslim creed. Nobody disagrees with this point. The Prophet was explicit in saying this. In other words, we can do all the good we want in the world, it's still not enough. It's going to have to be God's mercy and love at the end that saves us. It's always been this way. This is not a new idea I'm presenting to you. But regardless, there are two lives. One that we live here and one that we live there. What's important to note in Islamic tradition is that God expects us to beautify and build both homes. He expects us, now this is unique, you might not have heard this before. God actually expects us to build both homes. As a matter of fact, yesterday's Friday sermon that I had to do in Plano, I was explaining one singular verse of the Quran in which the terminology uses وَاسْتَعْمَرَكُمْ فِيهَا. He wanted you to build on the earth. He wanted you to build. And isti'mar is used in Arabic when you build something that lasts a long time, and while you're building it, you don't end up destroying other things. In other words, you build what you would call in the modern sense sustainable societies, eco-friendly societies, societies in which the few that are building major corporations and cities are not doing so at the expense of others that are being economically manipulated, right? So the idea of building something that anybody can benefit from, right? And so God goes out of His way in the Quran on countless occasions. It's really hard to put a count on this, to describe how beautiful the earth is, to describe how gorgeous mountains are, what a joy rivers are, what a great thing even, the desert Arabs didn't have a lot of that stuff. So he'd even talk about camels and how awesome they are. And the stars, because they really didn't have much else to look at, right? So at least the stars are pretty cool. So you talk about the stars. Even you can find beauty too. Even you can find beauty, And so you talk about these things to let us know that the life of this world, worldly existence, is not a curse. We're not damned here. We're blessed here. We're blessed here. Just stay away from these few restrictions, abide by these few regulations, and this world is beautiful. And your job is to make it beautiful and build it. And now, of course, when you build something, when you ask your child, I ask my child, hey, build me a castle. He says, buy me the Legos first. You can't build something until you have the ingredients, right? So he says, وَجَعَلَ فِيهَا أَقْوَاتَهَا in the Quran. He put in the earth all of its inherent powers. In other words, all you will need to make this world a beautiful place, for yourself and others, has been put in this earth. And human civilization has been here for quite a long time, and we've had resources enough for everybody. Now, it may not seem that way because of the varying economic situations of many countries, right? And economies, and the first world, second world, and third world, and all of that, right? But from the faith perspective, we believe actually there are enough resources for all human beings to live well on this earth and live in a healthy and a fair way. Okay, so that's our faith perspective on life in this world. You don't choose the next life for this life. You don't abandon the concern for the next life for this life. Either you balance both of them. In other words, we live a spiritual existence while being involved, greatly in this world at the same time. So there's nothing materialistic for a Muslim in, for example, running a multi-million-dollar business. There's nothing wrong with that. However, there is something wrong if that's his goal. So that's the other subtle point. So you can engage in this world, but it can't be your goal. Your goal is higher. Your goal is to do something that benefits others. And your goal is, if you really want to build a home, your goal is to build your real home in heaven. And so all that you do here is only a means to get there. Okay, so do a good job and enjoy it while you're doing it here, but make sure you're building your next life. And what's the easiest way to build your next life? This is another important Islamic concept. It's the concept of what's called sadaqah jariyah, continuous charity. Now what does that mean, continuous charity? It actually means if I leave a good legacy behind, I'm only going to live so many years. I don't know how long I'm going to live. If I can do some acts of good that actually live longer than I do, For instance, I go to a desperate location where education, for example, is a desperate need, and there aren't any resources. And I help set up a school. Let's just say, hypothetically speaking, I help set up a school. And the school takes off, and now children are getting a good education, and they're building a better and better society for their for the next generation. And this school takes off, and it goes on. It's now 200 years old. I left the world a long time ago, but every student who graduates from that school and does something good in life, I have a share in. I get commission out of that. That's called continuous charity. The Muslims are supposed to build their afterlife not just through good works of their own, but to to invest in opportunities of continual good. And that's how we see preparing ourselves for the next life. Like my motivation to teach, for instance, I was not originally a teacher. I wasn't even a public speaker. I was a nervous wreck when I had to speak in front of people. But this last month I had to give a sermon in front of 15,000 people in Malaysia. That was pretty nerve-wracking. But I've pushed myself in this direction, and my teachers did also. And one of the most motivating instructions or teachings from our religion that pushed me in this direction was a saying of our Prophet, in which he said, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the best of you are the ones who learn the Quran and teach it. The best people are the ones who learn this book of inspiration and give this inspiration to others so they can do awesome stuff. That's what I've been doing for the last, 12, 15 years. I lost count. That's what I've been doing. I also feel in our next session, not this session, but our next session, I'm going to talk to you about how I believe the Quran, one of the most popular books on the planet, like it or not, most popular book on the planet, most well-read by many statisticians, and if not the top, then up there, even if you disagree with the statistics, is actually one of the most misunderstood texts in world history. One of the most misunderstood and underestimated, overlooked, by Muslims and non-Muslims. And I'm going to highlight some of that stuff to you in our next session. Like what do I mean the Quran gets overlooked? Or some things in it just people don't even know it's there. Right? So we'll talk about that in the next session. Anyway, coming back to God's expectations from us. The first one was just a few restrictions. Don't do blasphemy. That's one expectation from God, right? The second one is build a good home here so you can build a good home there. And how do you build a good home here? By making sure you do things that benefit not just yourself but others. This is a fundamental concept.